There are stories carved not in stone, but in the memory of civilizations, stories that begin in silence, in the cradle of misfortune, and rise like thunder across the world. This is not the story of a man born to greatness. This is the story of one who took it. Rome was broken when his life began over this. A city of marble drowning in blood and ambition, its streets echoed with the cries of betrayal, of civil war, of powerful men fighting to wear the crown of destiny. And somewhere in that chaos stood a quiet child, small, unremarkable, an orphan with no armor except his will to survive. He watched. He learned. He understood something long before others ever could. Power is not taken by strength. It is taken by understanding the hearts of men. And so fate intervened, not with mercy, but with opportunity. He was adopted into a lineage of power, into a name that carried Rome itself. But a name alone does not make a ruler. He would need more, so he became a student of silence, a master of patience. While others raised swords and shouted their ambitions to the heavens, he listened. He planned. He understood the battlefield before stepping onto it. And when the time came, he did not break Rome. He outmaneuvered it. Enemies fell not because they feared his armies, but because they never saw him coming. Allies followed not because they loved him, but because he made himself inevitable. Then came the war that would decide an empire. A war that split oceans, shattered legions, and drew the world to the brink of collapse. But when the dust settled, when the shields cracked and the banners burned, there he stood, alone, the last man unbroken, and last man unbroken. And Rome bowed, not to a conqueror, but to a survivor. A child who rose from nothing and learned to reshape destiny with his own hands. He did not simply rule Rome. He rebuilt it, streets restored, laws reformed, armies disciplined. A world torn apart, finally given reason to breathe again. Yet understand this, the most dangerous ruler is not the one who controls armies, but the one who controls himself. For he knew when to strike, when to speak, and when silence was the loudest roar of all. So remember his journey. Remember the orphan who walked into history barefoot and left his footsteps carved into eternity. Because greatness is not inherited. Greatness is forged in struggle, patience, in the fire of a world that said you are not. And the quiet voice that answered back, fate does not always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it knocks in silence. The boy who once ate at the table of loss found himself standing before a door no orphan should ever touch. For in Rome, lineage was power and power was destiny. And destiny, that quiet architect of empires, placed a hand on his shoulder. He was adopted into a family whose name echoed in the Senate halls, a name that commanded armies and made rulers tremble in their marble villas. A family tied to Rome's greatest conqueror, a man whose shadow stretched across continents. But understand this, adoption was not acceptance. It was not love. It was a test. The nobles whispered, "He is too fragile. He is too sickly. He will never lead." Rome was a world that worshipped strength, and here stood a young boy, thin, quiet, thoughtful, a flame flickering in a storm of lions. Yet while others mocked his frailty, they ignored the sharpness of his mind. He memorized the Senate debates, the movements of generals, the subtle art of influence of generals, the subtle art of influence. He watched how men rose and how they fell. He understood early what would take others a lifetime. A sword can command a city, but a whisper can command an empire. He learned to read faces the way others read scrolls. Every hesitation, every lie, every ambition gasping beneath polished smiles. No classroom taught him this. Life did. And as his adopted father, Rome's mightiest leader, loomed over the world, the boy watched, quietly, faithfully. But then destiny struck with blood. The leader fell, not in war, but by the hands of his own allies, men who smiled as they sharpened their knives. And Rome collapsed into chaos once more. And the boy, the quiet, underestimated orphan, was handed a name. A name powerful enough to shake the republic. He did not scream vengeance. He did not rush to battle. No, he waited. He studied the betrayers. He observed those who pretended loyalty. He watched the city that pretended peace. He did not inherit power. He inherited a battlefield. And there, standing between destiny and destruction, he made his vow. I will not be a shadow. I will not be forgotten. I will not let Rome devour itself. But he knew the truth. Rome would not hand him the throne. He would have to carve it out of stone with his bare hands. And so began the quiet war, the war of alliances formed in candlelit chambers, The war of armies gathered not by force, but by loyalty woven in whispered promises. This was no child now. This was a seed of empire. Because sometimes the greatest rulers are not born in golden cradles, but in the ashes of loss. The orphan who received a name was about to make the world remember it forever. Power is not always claimed by those who shout the loudest. Sometimes it belongs to the one who watches, silent, unseen, until the world forgets he's even there. While Rome tore itself apart with prideful men, chasing glory with raised swords and raised tempers, he studied the battlefield that mattered most, the battlefield of the human heart. He knew something the generals did not. A war is never won on the field. It is won long before the first sword is drawn, and so he became a shadow moving through marble halls. He listened when others argued. He remembered details others dismissed. He stored grudges in silence like arrows waiting in a quiver. He learned patience. He let others underestimate him. The sickly youth, the quiet one, the thoughtful one, they thought weakness was his defining trait. They did not understand. A quiet man in a noisy world is the one who sees everything. He formed alliances not through force, but with measured words that cut deeper than steel. He offered loyalty where others offered threats, promises where others offered fear. And the powerful, the men who thought they controlled Rome, found themselves drawn to him, trusting him, never realizing that the spider they approached had already spun the web they walked into. Every smile he gave had meaning. Every silence held strategy. Every friendship he forged was a future victory waiting to unfold. And when Rome erupted into war once more, when the Senate fractured and commanders marched legions across rivers hungry for power, he did not rush. He watched them burn one another. He let ambition devour ambition. Let impatience destroy the impatient. Let pride consume the proud. He understood the one law that defines every empire. If you wait long enough, your enemy will destroy himself for you. And when the world was exhausted, when the swords were dulled, when the banners were torn, when every man who once claimed the throne stood injured, weak and desperate, he stepped forward, not loudly, not boastfully, but with a presence that silenced rooms. He spoke softly, yet his voice carried the weight of inevitability. For while others lived for the moment, he had lived for the end game. And Rome realized too late, the child they ignored, the name they doubted, the shadow they overlooked, had become the architect of their destiny. Not by brute force, but by patience sharpened to a blade. Because the greatest danger is not the storm you see coming. It is the quiet tide rising beneath your feet slowly, steadily, until you look down and realize the world has already changed. There comes a moment in every life when silence must give way to thunder. For years he had waited, studied, and shaped the hearts of men one whisper at a time. But destiny does not unfold in whispers. Destiny roars, and Rome was on fire. Rival generals marched under blood-red banners, each claiming they were the true heir to power. Once loyal soldiers raised swords against brothers. The Senate fractured like ancient marble struck by a hammer. The Tiber ran dark with the price of ambition. And at the center of it all stood the man who had once been a quiet orphan. This was no longer about survival. This was about the soul of Rome. He could no longer remain the silent strategist in the shadows. He had to become the storm. So he gathered legions. With threats, but with belief. Men followed him not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. They saw in him not a general, not a politician, but a man who understood the cost of peace and the weight of war. And when he marched, the earth remembered his footsteps. The final war was not fought in a day. It was fought in sleepless nights, in frozen camps, in deserts where thirst whispered death, in seas that swallowed ships whole. It was fought in the hearts of soldiers who wondered if they would ever see home again. But he did not waver. He did not falter. For he carried something stronger than fear, purpose. His rival was a man of brilliance, powerful, charismatic, merciless. A man who thought the world already belonged to him. The two clashed like storms colliding across the sky. Legions met legions, shields shattered. Winds carried the cries of history, and in the final battle, when the world held its breath, the orphan who once had nothing stood face to face with the man who once had everything. The field erupted in chaos, steel on steel, shadows on fire, destiny written in every heart. And when the dust lifted, when the horizon cleared, only one remained. The rival who claimed he was born to rule fell into the ocean of forgotten kings. And Rome knelt. not because it was conquered, but because it had finally found someone who understood its wound. This victory was not the triumph of ego. It was the triumph of a man who had walked through darkness and learned to carry it with dignity. He did not cheer. He did not boast. He simply looked upon the world and accepted the burden that fate had placed in his hands. For he knew a crown is not a symbol of power. It is a reminder of sacrifice, and only those who have known loss can truly rebuild. When the drums of war fell silent and the smoke drifted away from the ruins of shattered legions, Rome stood trembling, not from fear of invasion, but from the weight of its own wounds. Streets once filled with merchants and laughter now echoed with emptiness. Temples were cracked, families broken. The Senate, once the heart of Roman pride, reduced to whispers and frightened glances, and all eyes turned to him. The orphan, the strategist, the survivor of every betrayal and battlefield, he did not raise his voice. He did not revel in victory. Instead, he walked the streets of Rome in silence. He saw the damage not from the throne, but from the ground. He saw the hungry, the widowed, the soldier missing his right arm, the child waiting for a father who would never return. Most rulers build monuments to themselves. He built Rome, brick by brick, law by law, piece by piece. He reformed the Senate, not to destroy it, but to stabilize it. He reshaped the tax system, not to enrich the wealthy, but to give the common citizen a chance to live again. He rebuilt aqueducts so that water, the purest symbol of life, flowed back into the city. He restored temples, not for gods alone, but for the spirit of Rome itself. And with time, the city of blood and marble became a city of order, stability, and pride. But make no mistake, his greatness did not come without shadows. For the world does not remember gentle rulers. The world remembers those who reshape it. He was feared, he was respected, and above all, he was understood as necessary. Because Rome did not need a dreamer. Rome did not need a poet. Rome needed a man who had walked through fire and learned how to hold it without burning. He transformed the empire not with speeches but with discipline, not with cruelty but with control, not with miracles but with will. And when his final days came, when the empire he forged stood tall, golden in the sun, breathing again, he looked upon the world he saved, not as a king, not as a king, not as a god, but as a man who had risen from nothing, from orphan to emperor. And history bowed to him, for the greatest ruler is not the one who conquers the most land, but the one who conquers himself, his past, his pain, and the darkness that once tried to break him.